Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I'm going to tell you about the HOA that doesn't want me to move out of my house. The sirens started wailing before we even got the kitchen sink unbolted. I was standing in my driveway with a crowbar in one hand and a county-issued permit in the other, watching a pair of steel dollies creep under my house like slow-motion beetles. I'd warned everyone we were going to move the structure 15 feet across a freshly adjusted boundary line. I'd posted the dates. I'd coordinated with the county, and still, the first thing the neighborhood association did was call 911 on me as if I was heisting a museum. A squad car slid to the curb and an officer stepped out, palm resting on his belt, face set to neutral. Behind him, the association president, Arlena, power walker and self-appointed architect of everyone else's life, charged up with a stack of papers that lived in the crook of her arm like a life companion. "Officer," she announced, "this man is vandalizing community property. He is removing a structure without architectural approval. He cannot sell or move anything without our written consent." I handed over the permit and smiled in a way I hoped read "compliant adult" and not "man about to grind his teeth into sand." The officer took it, scanned, and nodded. "Looks like county's signed off on a temporary move. Escort requested and scheduled. That you?" "That's me," I said. "Name's Theo." Arlena laughed, one syllable like a thrown marble. "He thinks he can move out of the district. You can't. You can't do anything without board permission, and you can't sell the house without our consent. It's right there in our covenants." The officer flipped to a second page of my permit packet where I'd clipped a copy of the recorded boundary line adjustment. He took his time reading. It wasn't a short story, but it was a good one. A quick rewind. When I bought this place, I didn't know it was going to turn into a chess match. The listing had called it a vintage cottage, which is a nice way to say small wood box with personality. It had a wide porch and a fruit tree that released blossoms like confetti whenever the wind got silly. The house sat on piers instead of a slab because of a floodplain rule from decades earlier. It had been moved once before, long ago, and the steel runners still rested inside the crawl space like old bones. The association was quiet back then. The board changed hands the year after I moved in. That was when the flyers started. Paint color pre-approval a must. Trash cans out no more than 60 minutes. Architectural review for garden beds. The letters got bolder. The fines started small and grew like ivy. I paid the first one because I thought it might be easier to keep the peace. Then they fined me for the wrong shade of mailbox, claiming it visually disrupted the sightline. That's how I learned a mailbox could cause turmoil. When I protested, a man named Caspian from the board's compliance committee told me gently over email that if I just hired his cousin's landscaping company, they could ensure my property stayed in alignment and fines would be less likely to occur. Something about the phrasing felt like a damp handshake. I refused. The fines tripled the next month. I started reading the covenants the way people read mystery novels. It's strange how a set of rules can reveal a whole personality. Right there in plain wording, they'd written that any residence built upon permanent foundation required review and consent before exterior modifications. The cottage was not on a permanent foundation, not in the way the county defined it, and the covenants hadn't defined it at all. More interestingly, the recorded plat that had created the association showed a jagged border along my back fence, jagged enough to miss a narrow strip of land that wasn't included. Next lot over, an older guy named Hutch owned a sliver of property everyone assumed was useless. He used it to store a rusted trailer and a stack of split logs. It was outside the association's plat. He told me he got postcards every year from the board trying to welcome him to the community, and he tossed them into the fire pit, unopened. I hired a surveyor who measured twice and shook his head once. My house, he said, overlapped the association's boundary like a shirt cuff slipping past a jacket. It technically straddled the line. The kitchen and living room were within the association. The bathroom and a corner of the bedroom were over Hutch's sliver. It was an old mapping mistake, the kind that nobody fixes until someone cares. I cared. I met Hutch on his sliver and brought coffee. I explained the plan I'd been coloring in with research. If I acquired his strip and filed a boundary line adjustment to square my lot, I could relocate the house entirely onto the non-association parcel. My lot would still exist inside the association boundaries, but the dwelling itself would not. I'd still share the road and follow public rules, but the structure would be outside their purview. The county had a process. It wasn't fast, it wasn't easy, it was legal. Hutch laughed, and it wasn't unkind. He said the board had tried and failed to ticket his junk trailer twice. He said he liked my idea. He sold me the strip for what he called the nuisance price and gave me a handshake that felt like he meant it. Everything after that was paperwork and time. The county wanted site plans, engineer sign-offs, proof of utility disconnects, neighbor notices, a fee that made my wallet sigh. I posted the required notices with dates. I answered questions from anyone curious. A lot of neighbors were polite and quietly cheering me on because they'd gotten their own letters about overly decorative holiday lighting. Arlena and the board sent me 7 cease and desist letters in 2 weeks, each on thicker paper than the last. The third one included a line that still makes me shake my head when I think about it. You may not list or sell the dwelling or any portion of the property without board consent, which consent may be withheld at the board's discretion. It was the may be withheld that made me pick up the phone and call an attorney. The attorney, soft voice, sharp mind, told me the association couldn't legally require consent to sell a property. They could demand a status letter about dues, an estoppel certificate, but they could not stall or veto a sale out of spite. They could not claim the right to approve my buyer unless the covenant used a very particular mechanism, and even then might run afoul of fair housing laws. She suggested I keep everything in writing. She told me to treat their letters like proud peacocks, lovely to look at, noisy, mostly harmless. She helped me draft a response politely pointing out the sections of state law that say, in normal human language, you don't control the sale. While she was doing that, I was doing my own reading on the definition of structure and what it means to relocate one. My house was old, but engineered like a barge. A house-moving crew inspected the steel runners and gave me a quote that made my teeth hurt, but felt worth it. The plan? Lift the house using jacks, slide the dollies under, move it across the yard onto the adjusted parcel, reset it on new piers according to floodplain rules, tie into utilities on the other side. The county signed off. The neighbors asked if they could watch. I said sure. The morning of the move, I brewed coffee at dawn and stood in the yard. The crew arrived and were as careful as jewelers. We worked in slow silence at first. Then the whir of hydraulics and the groan of wood reminded me I was moving something that breathed in winter and softened in summer. I'd taped drawers shut. I'd pulled out the fridge. I'd taken the door off its hinges and leaned it against the porch rail. The house lifted a fraction and then another. That was the exact moment the first siren hit. By the time the officer finished reading, Arlena's voice had risen to the pitch that makes dogs tilt their heads. This is a safety hazard, she said. Children use this road. You're obstructing community access. Our bylaws require architectural committee oversight of any exterior change. This is the most exterior change I've ever seen. The officer was patient. He asked the foreman for his permit. He checked the traffic control sign we'd placed. He looked at the cones. He looked at me. You coordinated with the county for an escort? I pointed to the time on the permit. We've got one for the actual roll. Right now, we're just lifting and placing the dollies. We're not crossing the road. We're not obstructing anyone. Arlena stepped closer like she might reach for the permits, and the officer lifted them just out of her reach, not unkindly. Ma'am, he said, this is a civil matter between you and the association. This isn't a crime. I'll file a call log and mark it resolved. She sputtered, that's really the best word, and made a phone call in front of us, turning her back like she was a character in a stage play. I caught phrases like board authority and escalate and interference. The officer handed my papers back. You're good, Theo. Keep it safe. If you're blocking the road later, we'll be here for the escort. Try not to make any enemies for me today. I've been trying that for a year, I said. He smiled and left. Arlena remained 2 steps back from my property line like she was giving herself a rule to follow. This is not over, she said, and it sounded less like a threat and more like a promise she'd made to herself. I went back to work. The crew kept moving. The house lifted free from the earth in a slow shrug. It is a strange feeling to see your bed float a few inches. The crawl space went from dark to daylight, and there were the steel runners, thick and straight. The foreman, a guy named Roan who wore the same brand of boots as my granddad, nodded appreciatively. She's a good one, he said. They don't build them like this anymore. We slid the first dolly into place, then the second. The jacks did their patient dance. The dollies settled with a metallic sigh, and that's when Caspian walked up, wearing a polo with compliance embroidered over the heart. You know there's a fine for this, he said, cheerful as a weatherman delivering bad news about rain. Put it on my tab, I said, not looking up. And then take the tab and put it in a folder and write void on it in big letters. He laughed like he thought we were friends. "This stubbornness," he said. "If you just joined the preferred service list with my cousin, we could have gotten you to a place of alignment." "Go sell that alignment to somebody who wants it," I said. "I'm busy." He stepped back, typing on his phone, his thumbs twitching like nervous birds. I had this sudden, childish urge to ask if his cousin's landscaping was going to offer to move the house too, and if so, could they beat Roan's price. I kept my mouth shut. It wasn't a day for jokes. At noon, the county escort rolled up. 2 vehicles, lights. Roan gave a thumbs up. We had measured the roll to cover exactly 20 feet from center line to center line. It would take less than 5 minutes. The road wasn't busy, but I appreciated the escort, if only for the symbolism. The county saying, "We see you. Proceed." We moved the house. It is slow and then fast. The dollies chirped. The jacks hissed. The cottage made a sound like a ship releasing from a dock. A few neighbors clapped. One kid on a scooter let out an involuntary whoop. I swallowed hard because it felt like both a small miracle and years of stubbornness manifesting as forward motion. The front steps crossed the line first. The kitchen drifted. The living room. The beam of sunlight that always hit the corner at 2 in the afternoon stretched and then fell into a new coordinate on the earth. We set her down on the new piers like placing a cup carefully on a saucer. I exhaled. The escort peeled away. Roan started his checklist to secure everything. It was done. The house now sat wholly on the parcel the association didn't govern. Arlena had returned with reinforcements, 3 board members, each holding clipboards like shields. She pointed at the house and then at me. "You cannot dodge jurisdiction by playing games with lines. We are a community, not a loophole. We will continue to enforce, and to be absolutely clear, you are not permitted to sell that structure without consent." I had spent nights and a lot of coffee preparing for this exact moment. I told her calmly that the law didn't grant them veto power over a sale. I told her the house was not within the association's recorded plat. I told her the boundary line adjustment had been recorded with the county recorder. I told her the county had issued the necessary permits. And I told her her letters about consent to sell were stepping into territory regulated by state law. Unfair practices, restraint on alienation, words I'd learned to pronounce like a second language. She shook her head. "We will lien," she said. "We will impose daily fines. We will put you into collection." I gestured toward the sliver of grass where the house used to be. "You can lien the lot for dues," I said. "Collect your dues, but you have no authority to fine a structure that isn't within your boundary. Mail me whatever you like. My attorney loves reading." In truth, I hated that I sounded like a man who enjoyed attorneys. I didn't, but I'd found a good one. And I'd found my patience had a boundary line of its own. After the board retreated, the neighborhood rumor line crackled online. I got messages that ran the full spectrum. "You're a hero. You're reckless. Can you send me your surveyor's info? I heard the board can call the fire marshal." The last one led me to call the fire department myself and explain that everything was secure, that no hydrants were blocked, that the move was complete. The captain thanked me for letting him know. He said they'd already gotten a concerned community report, but he'd reviewed the permit notes and wasn't sending anyone. That evening, when the yard was quiet and the jacks were stowed, I sat on the front steps, temporarily propped, not yet tied into the new posts, and watched the one cloud that always seems to find the late sunlight and go pink. My neighbor across the lane, a retired teacher named Faye, brought over a casserole like it was a holiday. "I thought you might be too tired to cook," she said, then lowered her voice. "They came to my door this afternoon asking me to sign a petition to restore community order. I told them my order comes from the calendar and my doctor and not from folks with clipboards." I laughed because otherwise I might have done something else. That night, the association posted a special bulletin to the community site. A friend texted me a screenshot because the board had banned me from the forum after I'd quoted the covenants back to them, which they called arguing in bad faith. The bulletin declared that a resident has engaged in activities designed to evade community standards, and that the board will pursue all remedies, including notifying local authorities. I didn't sleep much. I spent 3 hours drafting a response I would not post on any site, a letter formalizing my position, referencing the laws my attorney had flagged, and giving the board a deadline to cease sending me fines for a structure not under their jurisdiction. I slept only after I wrote those paragraphs, like putting the words somewhere made them less heavy. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived from the board announcing a special hearing where they would consider imposing daily penalty assessments until I returned the house to its original position, pending approval. I let my attorney read it first. She responded with a letter that was polite and sharp enough to shave with. It cited the state statute that says homeowners associations must act within recorded covenants, and that penalties may be imposed only for violations under their authority. She used the phrase ultra-virus, which I'd come to enjoy in the way you enjoy a word that means you stepped outside your lane. I also filed a records request with the association. Most people don't realize you can do that. The association is a corporation with duties to provide records to members upon request: minutes, budgets, contracts. I asked for the last 2 years. I asked for a list of vendors and any conflict of interest disclosures. I asked for copies of all correspondence to third parties about me. That last part was strategic. If they'd tried to interfere with my ability to sell by contacting a title company or agent with false claims, I wanted it documented. They ignored the request. That was unsurprising. What was surprising was what happened next. On a Saturday morning, a couple I'd never met knocked on my half-hung front door. They introduced themselves, apologizing for the intrusion. They said they were under contract to buy a home in the community and had just been told by the board that all sales now required board consent due to a recent escalation. Their lender had asked them to confirm that legal right existed. They'd been sent my situation as an example of a problem resident. They wanted to know if that was true. I invited them onto the porch. I told them I wasn't in their transaction, but that, generally speaking, the association could not veto sales. I explained estoppel certificates. I told them to have their agent demand a copy of the specific covenant that gave the board the authority to consent to sales, and to verify it in the recorded documents. I told them to ask their lender's legal department to review that with fresh eyes. They looked relieved and then a little horrified in quick succession. "We just wanted a quiet place," the woman said, hugging herself. "I did too," I said. That afternoon, I got an email from the association's treasurer informing me I owed a set of expedited legal review fees for complex compliance events. It looked like an invoice. It had a due date. It threatened interest. It wasn't a joke. And I wrote back one sentence: "Please cite the recorded authority that allows you to bill me for this." The reply came back longer and full of words like customary and inherent. It did not include a citation. That was the week I realized this wasn't just about where my house sat. It was about people who had gotten used to power and were now confused by the concept of limits. And as much as I wanted to be the kind of person who doesn't fight, I was also the kind of person who does not like being told he can't sell his own property without someone else's say-so. So I made a list. At the top, finalize utilities on the new parcel, secure the porch, and get the inspection. In the middle, follow up on records requests, document every contact, and talk to my attorney about injunctive relief if they sent any more fake fines. At the bottom, bake brownies for Faye, because she'd been kind and the house smelled like plaster dust. The next siren didn't come for a few more days, and when it did, it wasn't for me. Not directly, but it would still end up tangled in my story, the way Ivy finds brick. And I'd learn, in a way I didn't expect, just how expensive it can be to pick up the phone and summon emergency lights as a way to win an argument. The second siren came on a Wednesday, the kind of warm afternoon where the asphalt gives off that heat mirage that makes your thoughts wobble. Roan and his crew were gone. The porch was tied back in. The utilities inspector had just left me a yellow tag that said "Approved for temp reconnection." I was sweeping sawdust off the steps when 2 fire engines rolled in like red thunder and stopped in front of my gate. One of the firefighters jumped down and yelled, "Gas leak, everyone back!" For a half second, I actually sniffed the air like a cartoon character. Then my brain caught up with reality. There was no smell. I'd been standing here the whole hour. The gas was still shut off at the meter from the move and capped, tagged by the utility with bright tape. There could be a leak anywhere, of course. Nobody ignores firefighters. I stepped back, hands visible, and pointed at the meter location. Valves are closed and capped. Utilities know. Permit on the porch. They were professional. They checked anyway, moving like they'd done this 1,000 times. They tested the line, scanned with a detector, checked the crawl space. The captain shook his head after 5 minutes and called the all clear. He walked over. "We got a call from a resident that you were reconnecting without an inspection, and they smelled gas on the street." "I have the inspection tag right there," I said, pointing. "And the gas is still off pending the final reconnection. You're welcome to a copy." He smiled, weary but sincere. "We're required to respond. No harm done." He paused. "But we do keep logs of call sources, and if we see a pattern of false reports, We can refer it for enforcement. Not saying that's happening, just saying that's how it works. I understand, I said, and I did, and my gratitude made my palms feel warm. After they left, I did 2 things I probably should have done earlier. First, I installed a camera pointing at my gate and another at the porch. Second, I submitted a public records request to the Emergency Communications Division for call logs referencing my address over the last month. In our state, you can request that, and while they redact personal identifiers, they include times, nature of calls, and notes. I wanted to know if I was imagining a pattern. While I was waiting on that, I was also chasing the association records. They'd ghosted my formal request for minutes and contracts. So I sent a second request, certified mail, citing the section of state law that requires association records be open to inspection by members and giving them 10 business days to comply. I also added a gentle note that failure to produce could result in a petition to the court to compel access and, potentially, attorney's fees. It wasn't a threat. It was one grown-up explaining to another what happens when you don't do your homework. That same day, I got a text from Faye. They taped a notice to my door. I walked across the lane. The notice, printed in a font meant to look severe, demanded she remove the temporary ramp at her front steps because it does not conform to approved materials and alters the visual harmony of the cul-de-sac. The ramp was a clean, simple wood structure her nephew had built so she could roll her knee scooter out after surgery. She was booked for a hip replacement next month. The ramp would be more than temporary then. She'd told the board about this. We both knew she had. She looked at me with a kind of tired that lives in the bones. "I don't want to fight," she said. "But I can't do these steps right now. I can barely carry groceries." "You don't have to fight," I said. "You can ask for something you're already entitled to." We sat at her dining table. I pulled up the relevant law on my phone because sometimes waving the right words makes people feel less alone. Under the Fair Housing Act, associations have to make reasonable accommodations for residents with disabilities. That includes allowing ramps. They can ask for plans to ensure safety. They can't deny flat out because of visual harmony. State law echoed this. I helped her draft a reasonable accommodation request, a short letter stating her medical need, attaching a simple drawing and a note from her doctor, asking for an exception to the architectural guidelines. We sent it certified and by email. We gave them 7 days to respond. The next morning, I found a watermarkless flyer on my windshield. "Community standards protect property values," it said, with a clip art house that looked like it was scolding me. The last line read, "Those who don't comply make it harder on everyone else." It wasn't signed, but it didn't need a signature. I recycled it and went back to my list. Utilities final, scheduled, appraisal, ordered, because I wanted a clean set of numbers in case I decided to sell sooner than later. Photographer, booked. I was going to list privately first as an off-market test. Curiosity had more than one bidder in this neighborhood. 2 days later, the Emergency Communications Office sent me the call logs. I read them with the kind of attention you give a tax letter or a good recipe. Slowly, twice. There had been 5 calls in 12 days about me or my address. One was the initial 911 call on moving day. Resident moving house unsafe. The officer's note afterward, legal permits in place. Another was a police non-emergency call. Suspicious truck, referring to the house moving crew, logged as resolved with crew identified, permitted. The third was the gas leak call, logged as no odor, no leak. Lines capped, inspection tag present. The fourth made me close my eyes for a second. Construction noise past hours, called in at 7:15 p.m., which is within our city's allowed hours, logged as noise within ordinance. The fifth was odd, possible unlicensed contractor on premises, logged as no violation, contractor licensed. The notes listed a callback number for each. They were not visible, redacted except for the last 4 digits. 3 of the 5 ended in the same last 4 digits. Patterns are funny. They take shape slowly and then all at once. I called my attorney. She asked if I wanted to pursue a harassment complaint or a civil restraining order. I wasn't sure yet. She suggested we wait, document, and simultaneously push on our main front, the board's attempt to claim control over my sale and my structure. The hammer fell faster than either of us expected. A title company sent me an email asking for a copy of the board consent letter for any sale or transfer of interest. I blinked at the screen. I hadn't even publicly listed the house yet. I had only spoken to one agent to ask for a valuation and to maybe line up a pocket listing. Then the agent forwarded me an email she'd received, unsolicited, from Complianco, the the board's address. It said, "Please be advised that any sale of my address requires association consent due to ongoing violations. We will not provide status letters while violations persist." That was not just incorrect, it was dangerous. If a title company believed that, I was handcuffed. This wasn't a disagreement about mailbox colors anymore. This was interference with a transaction based on a claim they knew or should have known was false. My attorney's email back was short and forceful. It demanded the association retract the statement to the title company, and my agent, within 24 hours, cited the state statute that requires associations to provide estoppel certificates within a fixed period upon request, with a fee cap, and warned that failure to do so would result in a petition for injunctive relief and a claim for tortious interference. She attached the recorded plat and the boundary adjustment and highlighted in friendly yellow the defined area where their authority stopped and where my house now sat. 20 hours later, we got a reply from the association's counsel. Yes, counsel. The board had hired a law firm, which meant everyone's stakes went up. Their lawyer's letter was tidy, expensive, and utterly wrong on two key points. It claimed architectural control of any structure originally constructed within the community, regardless of where it now sat. Not a thing, at least not in our covenants. And it claimed a policy that consent was required prior to sale to ensure good standing, as if a policy could trump statutory rights. My attorney sent a draft complaint. Tortious interference, declaratory judgment, injunction, records production, and fee-shifting statutes highlighted like neon. She didn't file it. She didn't have to. Just attaching a caption page was enough to sober people up. Within hours, the association coughed up a subset of records. Minutes blacked out like spy files. Budgets with line items named miscellaneous. But no vendor list, no disclosures, no emails. One entry jumped out. Motion to consider policy requiring consent for sales passes 3-2. Council to draft policy. No policy attached, and nothing recorded against the covenants, which is the only place power like that can live. Policies are just wishes on letterhead when they aren't backed by the recorded documents. I printed the minutes and started knocking on doors. Not my talent. My stomach shrank every time a deadbolt clicked. But sunlight beats rumor. I carried a one-page explainer, what a board can and can't do about sales, with citations to the statute and the plat. No editorial, just facts. I also brought a petition to call a recall meeting, as allowed by our bylaws. People were ready. A widow had been denied a simple swing because it was too visible. A dad got tickets for sidewalk chalk. A couple received 3 notices about a garden gnome, followed by a friendly nudge to hire a preferred vendor. That phrase kept popping up, and the dots began connecting themselves to certain cousins and consultants. Meanwhile, my neighbor Faye, recovering from surgery, received a denial of her reasonable accommodation request for a temporary ramp. The board suggested an approved aluminum style through, naturally, a preferred vendor at triple cost, and promised to review her appeal in 60 days. She had surgery in 35. My attorney and I filed a fair housing complaint that night. The investigator called the next morning, took a quick intake, and sent the association a letter spelling out their duty to accommodate. Denial letters written with too much confidence sound like admissions when an agency reads them. Then a deputy served me with a lien. Daily fines backdated to the day I'd posted my permit notice, alleging unapproved exterior modifications and failure to comply with architectural standards. I set the stack on the counter like a hot pan and called my attorney. Did they give you proper notice and a hearing with a written determination citing the exact provision? She asked. They had not. Then the lien is defective, she said, and added a request for a temporary restraining order to our complaint. No more liens, and no more misrepresentations to lenders or title companies about a mythical right to consent to my sale. We filed. A week later, in a quiet courtroom, the judge listened to maps and statutes, then to a poetic argument from the board's lawyer about essence and community feel. The judge favored plats over poetry. He granted the TRO, barring them from telling anyone they could veto my sale or control my house now that it sat outside the recorded boundary, and stopping further liens about the moved structure until a full hearing. 2 days later, the Fair Housing Office issued a conciliation letter. Allow Faye's ramp immediately, with her chosen materials, subject only to safety standards, and complete board training within 60 days. They signed. Paper is apology enough when it changes conduct. Arlena appeared at my gate, smaller than on moving day. "You've made this a spectacle," she said. I moved my house, I said. You called 911. She asked whether I really thought I could sell without them. People want rules they actually agreed to, I said, not whatever someone invents in a meeting. She said, we had to draw a line. I pointed at the survey stakes. You did. Then the county drew the actual one. The recall petition hit the required signatures. We set the meeting at the public library to neutralize the clubhouse under maintenance trick. While we waited, my cameras caught petty nighttime mischief. Permits peeled back, a sign tossed, tire ruts flirting with the new property line. I printed stills, dated them, and moved on. The special meeting felt like a parent-teacher night with adults determined to behave. A neighbor presented a timeline, letters, fines, the gas leak call, the ramp denial, the TRO, without mockery, just dates and documents. The board spoke of standards and alignment. The recall passed with a sigh and a landslide. A new slate took office promising transparency, compliance with law, no pressure to use preferred vendors, and an audit. They acted fast, rescinded any pretend consent-to-sell policies, withdrew the lien, scheduled fair housing training, hired an accountant, and dissolved the compliance committee. Enforcement went back to the rule of law, written complaints, citations to specific provisions, proper hearings, and an actual appeal process. The audit found unflattering receipts, contracts steered to relatives, policy services paid to a shadowy consultancy with ties to a board member, invoices without documentation. The new board referred it to Consumer Protection and their insurer. Separately, the Emergency Communications Office finished its review of the flurry of 911 calls. It fined the repeat caller for misuse and referred the worst set to the prosecutor under a false reporting ordinance. No victory lap, just relief that sirens would go back to serving emergencies. Selling felt anticlimactic. I staged the cottage myself, disclosed the move and the boundary adjustment, and stated, plainly, that the house wasn't under the association's architectural control. 3 offers came in. I chose the cleanest, not the highest, from a family who attached the TRO to their acknowledgement to say they'd read the record. The title company requested the estoppel certificate. The new board returned it in 2 days with a small dues balance and 0 consent language. We closed 3 weeks later. The kids declared the porch good for popsicles. I handed over the key worn smooth by years in my pocket. Ripples kept moving. The fair housing training stuck. Phase Ramp, now nicknamed the Freedom Bridge, was joined by a fast approval for another neighbor's widened doorway. The Consumer Protection Office entered a consent agreement requiring reimbursements and a civil penalty for contracting without proper procedure, plus a ban on serving on the board for a while. Not handcuffs. Paper consequences that fix paper harm. The emergency caller did community service at the 911 center and stopped dialing the siren to win arguments. I moved to a smaller place without a homeowners association. It's not perfect. Trash day chaos, a neighbor who drums, but you solve things at the door, not by flyer. Before the lawsuit closed, the judge looked at me and said, "You moved your house, Mr. Theo?" I said yes. He smiled. That's one way to respect a boundary. If you're waiting for a theatrical ending, you'll miss the real ending. Fines for false calls, training for those who needed it, refunds for what couldn't be justified, a recalled board, and a declaratory judgment that will outlive everyone's memory of the argument. The culture shifted. People started saying, "Show me where it says that," and "How can we make it work?" instead of "Because we said so." On a bench at the library where we held the recall, a small plaque now reads, "For anyone who needs a quiet place to figure out what the rules actually say." Someone left an estoppel certificate copy under it with a handwritten note. "Got it in time. Closed Friday, thanks." There's the paper people wave and the paper that's recorded. One is theater, one is law. Pick the one that wins in a courthouse, and if you have to, move your house 15 feet to prove it. Friends, thank you. See you soon.